Welcome to Crazy Karen HOA. The board tried to play dumb, and I played documented. A neighbor tried to hand me an old notice, and Janice screamed that passing documents was harassment. "You want to argue? Great. Argue at the hearing," she snapped, her voice cutting across the driveway like a blade. I stood there with the tow warning tag still in my hand, a bright orange sticker with bold print and no readable text, just shapes and logos. The neighbor who had tried to give me the old notice backed away slowly, hands up like he was defusing a bomb. Janice Lee, board secretary of the Golden Mesa Design Review Association, had appeared out of nowhere the second he approached me, and now she was between us like a referee who only blew the whistle on one team. This is Minneapolis, Minnesota, in a community where the board claims the rules are clear but will not show you the page. I work as an airline baggage supervisor, so I have seen every kind of chaos, every kind of meltdown, every passenger who insists the rules do not apply to them. But Janice was a different species. She wore her white blazer like armor and her badge clip like a shield, even though there was nothing readable on it, just a blank laminated rectangle that caught the light when she moved. The blue sun hat perched on her head somehow stayed in place no matter how much she gestured. She slammed a pair of work gloves on the hood of my car. "You think you can ignore the process," she said, jabbing a finger at the gloves. "You think you can let violations pile up and then act surprised when enforcement happens." I stared at the gloves. They were mine. I had left them on my porch 2 days ago after pulling weeds. Now they were evidence, apparently. I took a breath. "Janice, I got a tow warning this morning. I have not received any violation notices. No emails, no letters, nothing." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made you check your back pocket for your wallet. "We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works." The neighbor who had tried to hand me the paper was already halfway down the block. I did not blame him. Janice had a way of turning a driveway into a courtroom and herself into judge, jury, and bailiff. The tag on my windshield had appeared sometime between midnight and 6 in the morning. I know because I work nights, and my car had been clean when I parked it. The timing was too perfect. I had just submitted a records request 3 days earlier, asking for old board minutes and financial summaries from 2 years ago. There had been a scandal back then. Something about a special assessment that never got explained. Money that disappeared into a line item called consulting fees. And a tow company that got a contract nobody remembered approving. The whole thing had blown over when the previous board president resigned and moved out of state. But I had started asking questions because my neighbor, an older guy named Phil who used to be on the board, mentioned it when I moved in last year. He said the case never got solved, just buried. Now Janice was standing in front of me with her arms crossed, blocking my view of the street, and I could see the tow operator leaning against his truck at the end of the block. He was watching carefully, hands in his pockets, like he had seen this play before. I kept my voice level. "I want to see the violation log. I want to see what I am being cited for." Janice pulled a folded printed agenda packet from her blazer pocket. The pages crisp and clean with no readable text, just lines and columns. "This is the compliance schedule," she said. "Your property is under review. You have until the end of the month to bring everything into alignment or the fines escalate." The HOA claims the fine schedule changes at the first of the month and the deadline is tomorrow. I looked at the packet. I looked at the tow warning. I looked at the gloves still sitting on my hood. None of this made sense. "What violations?" I asked. She tapped the packet. "All documented, all logged, all compliant with association policy. You do not build to my standard, you pay to my standard. She said it like a slogan she had rehearsed. I made a mental note. That phrase was going to come back. I could feel it. I did not argue. I said almost nothing, because silence makes people talk. Janice shifted her weight, annoyed that I was not giving her a fight. The deadline is tomorrow, she repeated. If you miss it, the fines double and we proceed with the tow. I nodded slowly, pulling out my phone. I am going to document this conversation. She stiffened. You are not allowed to record without consent. I smiled. Minnesota is a one-party consent state. I am the one party. I hit record and held the phone at my side, camera pointing at her. Janice turned and walked away, her blue sun hat bobbing as she moved. The tow operator climbed back into his truck and drove off without hooking anything. I stood there for another minute, replaying what had just happened. The neighbor had tried to hand me an old notice, something he had kept from 2 years ago. Janice had intercepted it like she was running zone defense. That meant the old notice mattered. I went inside and called Phil. Phil answered on the second ring. I told him what happened. He sighed, long and tired. That is Janice. She has been doing this since she got elected secretary 3 years ago. She controls the paperwork. She controls the portal. She controls who sees what. If you are asking about the old case, she is going to come at you hard. I asked him what he remembered. He said the tow company had been the enforcement muscle back then, showing up at random, tagging cars that were not even in violation, pressuring people to pay fines just to make it stop. The board had signed a contract with them, but nobody could ever produce the signed copy. When the scandal broke, the president resigned, the tow company quietly ended the contract, and Janice got promoted to secretary. She had been treasurer before that. I asked Phil if he still had any of the old documents. He said he had a binder, but it was incomplete. A lot of the meeting minutes from that year were missing pages. Some of the financial reports had line items that did not add up. He offered to bring the binder over. I told him to meet me at the clubhouse exterior walkway in an hour, where people could see us. I did not want Janice claiming we were conspiring in secret. Phil showed up with the binder. It was thick, stuffed with printed emails, meeting minutes, and financial summaries. I flipped through it while we stood under the awning. Janice was across the parking lot pretending to check her mail, but I could see her watching us. Phil pointed to a page. This is the month the tow contract supposedly started. But look at the minutes. There is no motion, no vote, no discussion. It just appears in the financial summary as a line item. I looked closer. The financial summary was dated March 15th, but the meeting minutes from that month were dated March 22nd. The contract expenses showed up before the meeting even happened. Phil leaned in. And look at this. He showed me a complaint log entry from that same period. It was typed in the same style as every other complaint Janice files now. Same phrasing, same formatting, same tone. The complaint was supposedly submitted by 3 different homeowners, but the email metadata showed they were all sent from the same IP address. I took a picture of the page with my phone. Phil said the IP address had been traced back to the HOA office, but nobody followed up. The president resigned a week later, and the investigation died. I asked Phil why he did not push harder. He shook his head. I was outvoted. Janice and 2 other board members shut it down. They said it was a distraction, that we needed to move forward, that dragging it out would only hurt property values. I got tired of fighting, and I did not run for re-election. But I kept the binder because I knew it would come back someday. And here you are. Janice started walking toward us. I closed the binder and tucked it under my arm. Phil stepped back, hands up again. "I am just a neighbor handing over old documents," he said loudly, making sure Janice could hear. "Public records, all of it." She stopped a few feet away, arms crossed. "You two are done here," she said. "This is association property. If you are not conducting official business, you need to leave." I looked around. The walkway was open to all residents. I said so. Janice pulled out her phone. "I am calling the tow company. Your car is illegally parked." I looked at my car. It was in a visitor spot, perfectly legal. I did not move. If you are loving this chaos, hit that like button and subscribe, because this is only the beginning. She made the call. I recorded it. She spoke into the phone like she was dispatch, giving my plate number, my location, describing my car as abandoned. The tow operator on the other end must have said something, because she snapped, "I do not care what your policy is. This is an HOA enforcement action and you are under contract." She hung up and smiled at me. "They will be here in 20 minutes. I held up my phone. "I have you on record calling a tow on a legally parked car. That is abuse of process." She shrugged. "Prove it." I walked to my car. Phil followed. We waited. Janice stood on the walkway, watching us like a hawk. 15 minutes later, the same tow truck from earlier pulled into the lot. The operator got out slowly, looking between me and Janice. He walked over to Janice first. She pointed at my car and started talking fast, her hands moving, her voice rising. The operator held up a hand. "Ma'am, I already checked this vehicle this morning. It is legally parked. There is no violation." Janice stepped closer. "I am the board secretary. I am authorizing this tow." The operator looked at me. I held up my phone. "I have her on recording making a false report." He nodded and got back in his truck. Janice turned to me, her face red. "You think you are clever. You think you can dig up old dirt and embarrass the board. But you have no idea what you are doing. The rules are the rules. You do not build to my standard. You pay to my standard." I stayed quiet. She pulled a folded printed agenda packet from her blazer again, this time with different pages. "This is your new compliance schedule. You have 3 days to submit a corrective action plan, or we proceed with a lien." I took the packet. I looked at the date printed at the top. It was today, but the file metadata visible in the corner showed it had been created last week. She had backdated it and printed it fresh. That night, I went through the binder page by page. I found 3 major clues. First, the complaint log entries that were supposedly from different homeowners but came from the same IP address. Second, the financial summary showing tow contract expenses before the contract was approved. Third, a meeting minutes page that had been edited after the meeting. The original file was still in the binder because Phil had printed it the day after the meeting. But the official version on the HOA website was different. Key sentences had been deleted, including a motion to table the tow contract discussion until the next meeting. In the edited version, the motion had been removed and replaced with a sentence saying the contract was approved by unanimous consent. I scanned every page. I uploaded them to a secure folder. I made 3 backup copies. Then I emailed the HOA attorney with a formal records request, asking for the original unedited meeting minutes, the signed tow contract, and the complaint log metadata. I copied Janice, the board president, and the management company. I did not expect a fast response, but I needed to start the paper trail. The next morning, I got an email from Janice. It said my records request was denied because I had not used the proper form. She attached a PDF of the form, which was dated from last month and had never been mentioned in any prior correspondence. The form required a notarized signature. I forwarded the email to the attorney and replied to Janice, noting that Minnesota law does not allow HOAs to require notarization for records requests. She replied within minutes, saying the form was association policy and I needed to comply. I replied again, citing the statute. She did not respond. That afternoon, I got a second tow warning. This time it was on my car when I came home from work. The tag said I was parked in a fire lane. I was not. I was in my assigned spot. I took pictures of the tag, the spot number painted on the curb, and my car registration showing the spot was mine. Then, I called the tow company directly. The dispatcher said they had received a call from the HOA office requesting a tag placement. I asked if they had verified the violation. The dispatcher hesitated. We rely on the HOA to confirm violations. If the HOA says it is a violation, we tag it. I told her I was parked legally, and this was the second false report in 2 days. She said she would make a note in the file. I called the management company next. I got transferred 3 times before I reached someone who claimed to handle compliance. I explained the situation. The rep said Janice was the point of contact for all enforcement actions, and they did not override her decisions. I asked to speak to the property manager. The rep said the manager was unavailable. I asked when the manager would be available. The rep said they would have someone call me back. Nobody called. Phil texted me that evening. He said Janice had been going door to door, asking neighbors to sign a petition supporting stricter enforcement policies. One of the neighbors showed him the petition. It was full of vague language about maintaining property values and ensuring compliance, but buried in the middle was a clause authorizing the board to take immediate action, including towing and fines, without prior notice to the homeowner. Phil said 3 people had already signed it before they realized what it said. I met with Phil again, this time at a coffee shop off the property. He brought 2 more neighbors who had been targeted by Janice in the past. One of them, a woman named Carol, said Janice had filed a complaint against her for parking an RV in her driveway. The rules said RVs were not allowed, but Carol had gotten written approval from the previous board to park it temporarily while she renovated her garage. When Janice took over as secretary, she claimed the approval had expired and filed a complaint. Carol fought it and won, but only after hiring a lawyer. The whole process cost her $3,000. The other neighbor, a man named Derek, said Janice had tried to fine him for painting his house the wrong color. He had submitted a paint sample and received approval in writing. When he finished the job, Janice claimed the color did not match the sample and demanded he repaint. Derek refused and took it to a hearing. The hearing officer ruled in his favor, but Janice appealed the decision and dragged it out for 6 months. Eventually, the board dropped it, but Derek said the stress almost made him sell his house. I asked them if they still had their documentation. They both did. I asked if they would be willing to submit statements to the HOA attorney. They agreed. I collected their emails and phone numbers. Then I asked if they had noticed anything strange about Janice's role as secretary. Carol said Janice controlled the portal admin tools and often locked people out if they questioned her. Derek said Janice had a habit of scheduling meetings at the last minute and then claiming people had missed the deadline to submit comments. That night, I drafted a formal complaint to the HOA attorney, outlining the harassment, the false tow reports, the backdated documents, and the pattern of abuse. I attached the binder scans, the emails, the photos, and the statements from Carol and Derek. I sent it via certified mail and email. I kept the tracking number and the receipt. Then I waited. 3 days later, I got a call from the HOA attorney. He introduced himself as Mark, and his tone was careful. "I have reviewed your complaint and the attachments. I need to ask you some questions." We talked for 30 minutes. He asked about the timeline, the tow warnings, the complaint log, and the meeting minutes. He asked if I had the original files. I told him Phil had them. He asked if Phil would be willing to provide them directly. I said yes. He thanked me and said he would be in touch. 2 days after that, I got a notice in the mail. It was from Janice, on HOA letterhead with no readable text on the logo, just shapes. The notice said I was being fined $500 for failure to submit a corrective action plan. The plan was due yesterday, according to the notice. I checked my calendar. The deadline Janice had given me verbally was today. She had moved the deadline in writing and then fined me for missing the fake deadline. I took pictures of the notice. I checked the email thread with Janice. The original deadline was clearly stated as today. I forwarded everything to the attorney with a note. Janice insists on a deadline and the timestamp proves she lied. Mark replied within an hour. "Do not pay the fine. I am scheduling a meeting with the board." The meeting was set for the following week at the clubhouse. I prepared my materials, printed copies of the binder pages, the complaint log metadata, the edited meeting minutes comparison, the emails, the tow warnings, the photos, and the statements from Carol and Derek. I organized everything into a presentation folder. I practiced my talking points. I was not going to let Janice steamroll me. The day before the meeting, I got another email from Janice. It said the meeting location had been changed to the management company office, and the time had been moved up by 2 hours. I forwarded it to Mark. He called me immediately. That is not a legitimate notice. The board cannot change the meeting time and location without proper notice to all parties. I am contacting the board president now. An hour later, Mark emailed the full board, copying me, stating that the meeting would proceed as originally scheduled, and any attempt to relocate it would be a violation of association bylaws. Janice replied to the email chain, claiming the change was necessary due to a scheduling conflict. Mark replied, asking her to document the conflict. She did not respond. The night before the meeting, I could not sleep. My mental health has been fragile, and the harassment is pushing me to the edge. I kept replaying every interaction, every document, every moment Janice had tried to intimidate me. I thought about giving up, about just paying the fines and moving somewhere else. But then, I thought about Carol and Derek, about Phil, about every other person Janice had targeted. If I walked away, she would keep doing it. Someone had to stop her. The next morning, I arrived at the clubhouse 30 minutes early. Phil was already there, sitting on a bench outside. He had brought his own folder of documents. Carol and Derek showed up a few minutes later. Mark arrived right on time, carrying a briefcase and wearing a suit. He shook my hand and said, "Let us see what we have." We walked inside. The meeting room was small, with a long table and chairs on both sides. The board president, a man named Tom, was already seated at the head of the table. Janice sat next to him, her white blazer spotless, her blue sun hat resting on the table next to a stack of papers. 2 other board members sat across from her. Mark took a seat next to me. Phil, Carol, and Derek sat behind us in the observer chairs. Tom started the meeting by reading a prepared statement. He said the board took all complaints seriously, and they were committed to fair and transparent processes. Then he turned to Janice. Can you walk us through the compliance actions taken against this homeowner? Janice opened her folder and pulled out the folded printed agenda packet. She launched into a detailed recitation of every alleged violation, every missed deadline, every failure to comply. She spoke quickly, her voice confident, her tone dismissive. She did not look at me once. When she finished, Tom asked if I wanted to respond. I opened my folder. I started with the tow warnings. I showed the photos, the timestamps, the legal parking confirmation. I showed the complaint log entries with the metadata proving they came from the same IP address. I showed the meeting minutes comparison, highlighting the deleted motion. I showed the emails where Janice moved the deadline and then fined me for missing the fake deadline. I kept my voice steady. I let the documents speak. Janice interrupted. Those are out of context. You are cherry-picking fragments to build a false narrative. Mark cut in. These are official HOA records. If they are out of context, provide the full context. Janice hesitated. She shuffled her papers. She pulled out another agenda packet. This is the full compliance file. Mark took it. He flipped through it. Half of these pages are dated after the complaint was filed. Did you create these documents retroactively? Janice stammered. That is standard procedure. We update files as new information becomes available. Mark set the packet down. That is called fabricating evidence. Tom looked uncomfortable. He asked the other board members if they had any questions. One of them, a woman named Linda, asked me if I had any other evidence. I nodded. I pulled out my phone. I played the recording of Janice calling the tow company and making the false report. I played the recording of her threatening me on my driveway. I played the recording of her admitting that enforcement could happen without notice. The room went silent. Linda looked at Janice. Is that your voice? Janice did not answer. Tom asked again. Janice, is that you on the recording? She nodded slowly. Tom leaned back in his chair. He looked at Mark. What are our options here? Mark opened his briefcase and pulled out a legal memo. Based on the evidence presented, the association is exposed to significant liability. The false tow reports, the fabricated deadlines, the altered meeting minutes, and the abuse of process all constitute violations of Minnesota HOA statutes. If this homeowner files a lawsuit, the association will lose. The board needs to take immediate corrective action to reduce liability. Tom asked what corrective action meant. Mark listed it out. First, reverse all fines and fees against this homeowner. Second, issue a formal apology. Third, remove Janice from any role that involves enforcement or records access. Fourth, conduct a full audit of all compliance actions taken under her tenure. Fifth, terminate the contract with the tow company if it is still active. Tom looked at Janice. She was staring at the table, her hands clenched. Tom asked for a motion. Linda moved to adopt all 5 points. The other board member seconded. Tom called for a vote. It was unanimous, 3-0. Janice abstained. Tom looked at her. Effective immediately, you are removed from all enforcement and records duties. You will retain your role as secretary for meeting minutes only, but you will no longer have admin access to the portal or any compliance files. Janice stood up, grabbed her blue sun hat, and walked out without a word. Mark turned to me. The association will issue a refund check for any fees you paid, plus reimbursement for your time and legal consultation. You should receive it within 10 business days. I will also be recommending that the board conduct a forensic audit of the old case you mentioned. If there was financial misconduct, it needs to be addressed." I thanked him. Phil, Carol, and Derek clapped quietly from the back row. After the meeting, I walked outside with Phil. He was grinning. "You did it. You actually did it." I shrugged. "I just followed the paper trail." He laughed. "You did more than that. You reopened a case everyone thought was dead. You proved she was dirty. And you made the board hold her accountable." I told him I could not have done it without his binder. He waved me off. That binder was useless without someone willing to fight. You fought. A week later, I got the refund check. It was not just my fees. The board had decided to refund several other neighbors who had been targeted by Janice in the past. Carol and Derek both got checks. The total payout was over $15,000. The board also voted to terminate the tow company contract and hire a new vendor with stricter oversight requirements. The forensic audit was scheduled to start the following month. 2 weeks after that, I ran into Janice at the mailbox cluster. She did not say anything. She just looked at me, her face blank, and walked away. I heard later that she had resigned from the board entirely. The new secretary was a retired teacher named Susan, who had no interest in enforcement drama and just wanted to keep accurate meeting notes. Phil invited me over for a barbecue to celebrate. He introduced me to more neighbors, people who had been quietly suffering under Janice's regime and were relieved to see her gone. One of them, a guy named Mike, told me Janice had tried to fine him for having a basketball hoop in his driveway. He had fought it for months before finally giving up and moving the hoop. Now he was putting it back. I asked Phil what he thought would come out of the audit. He said it was hard to say. If Janice had been skimming money or taking kickbacks from the tow company, it would show up. If she had just been altering records to cover up board incompetence, that would show up too. Either way, the association was finally going to get answers. A month later, the audit results came in. The auditor found that the tow company had been overbilling the HOA for years. The contract had been set up so that the company got a flat fee per month plus a percentage of all fines collected. Janice had been signing off on the invoices without verifying the charges. The auditor estimated the HOA had overpaid by at least $30,000. The board voted to pursue a claim against the tow company and to file a complaint with the state licensing board. The auditor also found that several meeting minutes had been altered after the fact, not just the one I had identified. In some cases, motions had been added. In other cases, votes had been changed. The auditor recommended that the board adopt a new policy requiring meeting minutes to be digitally signed and timestamped to prevent future tampering. The board adopted the policy unanimously. The most satisfying moment came when the board attorney sent a formal demand letter to the tow company, citing the overbilling and the false reports. The tow company responded by terminating their contract immediately and offering a partial refund. The board accepted the refund and used it to pay back the homeowners who had been overcharged. A vendor termination that cuts off Janice's favorite enforcement muscle. She had built her entire enforcement strategy around that tow company, and now it was gone. Janice tried to fight back one more time. She submitted a written statement to the board claiming she had been unfairly targeted and that all her actions had been in good faith. The board did not respond. Mark, the attorney, sent her a letter stating that if she continued to make false claims, the association would consider it harassment and take further action. She went quiet after that. I also learned that Janice had been stripped of access to the portal admin tools, just like Mark had recommended. The new secretary, Susan, took over the portal and immediately noticed discrepancies in the complaint logs. Several complaints had been filed under other people's names without their knowledge. Susan contacted those homeowners and confirmed they had never submitted complaints. The board issued a formal apology and deleted the fake complaints from the record. Phil told me that one of the fake complaints had been filed in his name, accusing a neighbor of having an unauthorized shed. Phil had never made such a complaint. He confronted Janice about it before she resigned, and she claimed it was a clerical error. Phil did not believe her. He thought she had been filing complaints in other people's names to make it look like there was widespread community support for her enforcement actions. The HOA attorney forces a reversal to reduce liability, and the board had no choice but to comply. They reversed not just my fines, but every fine Janice had issued in the past year. They sent refund checks to over 20 homeowners. The total cost to the HOA was over $40,000, but Mark argued it was cheaper than the lawsuits that would follow if they did not act. Karen gets stripped of access to the portal admin tools, and without that access, Janice had no way to continue her harassment campaign. She could not file complaints, she could not issue fines, she could not alter records. She was effectively neutered. The board had taken away her power, and she had no way to get it back. The funny karma moment came when Susan discovered that Janice had filed a complaint against herself. It was buried in the logs, dated from 6 months earlier. The complaint accused Janice of violating the noise ordinance by running a leaf blower before 8 in the morning. Janice had apparently filed it by accident while testing the complaint system, and then she had issued herself a fine. She had paid the fine out of her own pocket, probably to avoid admitting the mistake. When Susan found it, she refunded Janice's money along with everyone else's. Janice insists on a deadline, and the timestamp proves she lied. But in this case, the timestamp proved she had fined herself. Phil thought it was the funniest thing he had ever seen. I kept the binder. I added my own documents to it, everything from the tow warnings to the meeting minutes to the audit report. I labeled it "Cold Case Closed" and put it on a shelf in my office. Every time I look at it, I remember that the rules only work if people are willing to enforce them fairly. Janice had spent years using the rules as a weapon, and it took one reopened case to bring her down. The neighborhood is quieter now. People are not afraid to park in their own driveways. They are not afraid to paint their houses or put up basketball hoops or ask questions at board meetings. The new board is more transparent, more accountable, and more willing to listen. It is not perfect, but it is better. I still see the tow operator sometimes, driving through the neighborhood on other calls. He always waves. I wave back. He knows what happened, and I think he respects that I stood up to Janice. I also see Carol and Derek at community events. We have become friends. We joke about starting a support group for HOA survivors. Phil retired from his job last month, and now he spends his time gardening and going to board meetings just to keep an eye on things. He says he is the unofficial watchdog, making sure no one else tries to pull what Janice did. I told him he should run for the board again. He laughed and said he had done his time. But he did agree to serve on the new compliance committee, which reviews all enforcement actions before they go out. It is a checks and balances system that should have been in place from the beginning. As for Janice, I heard she moved out of the neighborhood a few months after she resigned. Someone said she bought a condo in a building with no HOA. I do not know if that is true, but I hope it is. Maybe she learned her lesson. Or maybe she is just biding her time, waiting for another board to take over, so she can start the cycle again somewhere else. Either way, she is not my problem anymore. The final piece of the puzzle came when the forensic auditor released a supplemental report. It turned out that Janice had been receiving a referral fee from the tow company for every car they tagged. It was not a lot of money, maybe $50 per tag, but over 2 years it added up to several $1,000s. The auditor found the payments in Janice's personal bank records, which the board had subpoenaed as part of the lawsuit. Janice had not reported the income to the IRS, so she ended up with tax problems on top of everything else. The board used that information to negotiate a settlement. Janice agreed to repay the referral fees and to sign a statement admitting she had violated her fiduciary duties. In exchange, the board agreed not to pursue criminal charges. It was not the outcome I would have chosen, but Mark said it was the most practical solution. A criminal trial would have been expensive and time-consuming, and there was no guarantee of a conviction. The settlement gave the HOA its money back and closed the case for good. I got a copy of the settlement agreement. I added it to the binder. Then I closed the binder and put it back on the shelf. I do not need to look at it anymore. The case is closed. Justice was served. The neighborhood is healing. But I will never forget what it felt like to stand on that driveway, holding a tow warning in my hand, knowing that something was wrong and deciding to do something about it. I will never forget the moment I played that recording in the meeting and watched Janice's face go blank. I will never forget the look on Phil's face when the board voted to remove her from power. And I will never forget the relief I felt when the refund check arrived in the mail, proving that sometimes, if you fight hard enough and follow the paper trail, you can win. The Golden Mesa Design Review Association is not perfect. No HOA is. But it is better than it was. And that is because people like Phil and Carol and Derek and I refused to let Janice get away with it. We reopened the cold case. We followed the clues. We caught the culprit. And we made sure she could never do it again. I will see you in the next HOA story.